What's the most inappropriate thing you witnessed at a funeral? My father's funeral. After the service and the reception after, my mother, brother and sister headed back to our family home. A bunch of my father's siblings and their family were also staying at the house with us. We got home a few minutes before everyone else. I was sitting at the table in the living room when I could see their cars come down the driveway. They all got out and were hugging and seemingly congratulating each other. The reception after the service was beautifully put together and was actually a fun time. A fitting send-off for my father, so I assumed they were still just having fun from that, until they came inside. They all came in together very quickly and quietly. They came up to me and my older brother sitting at the table, and kind of crowded around like a bunch of kids about to see if they could have a cookie before dinner. My Aunt Barbara smugly stood at the front and asked, "So, when are we going to be doing the reading of the will to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I just looked at each other for a few moments before we turned to them to say, "Are you kidding? Reading of the will? Like a soap opera? There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to my father now just belongs to my mother." The look of defeat, but not shame, was disgustingly transparent. They were supposed to stay another few nights. They packed up and left that afternoon. My own kids, boys ages 10 and 8. At their great-grandfather's wake, they got a chair and moved it to the casket, and started making his mouth into smiley face, laughing the whole time. When me and their grandfather, my father-in-law, saw it, I immediately pulled them away and told them they shouldn't do that. Grandpa laughed and said, "He's fine. He would have really loved that they did that." We later found out that the great-grandfather had asked the funeral home ahead of time to put a sign in his hand that said, "Thanks for coming," but they refused. The funeral home putting a random guy in my grandfather's casket, suit, glasses, and wedding band, while then admitting that they had misplaced my grandfather was fairly inappropriate for a funeral. At my grandpa's funeral in 2006, a random drunk woman that no one in our family knew stumbled in and started singing show tunes, then crying till she was escorted out. An estranged uncle driving past my grandmother's funeral playing Another One Bites the Dust. Edit: to everyone apologizing for laughing or whatever, please don't. It's no longer a sore point for me or my family. That uncle was suffering from a mental breakdown due to drug abuse and high pressure job, and that combination eventually took its toll. It makes it easier to deal with that if he was just being a spiteful prick, as we thought at the time. My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." Edit: she, as well as most of the people attending the funeral, were all Jewish. Only somewhat inappropriate, but certainly the funniest thing. It was a funeral for an uncle I was very distantly related to, and this is happening in Greece, in the summer. The church is very full and incredibly hot. You can smell the sweat, there's incense, the air isn't circulating, and the priest is just going on and on. I don't think I can describe how grim the situation was. Not totally unexpectedly, therefore, just as the priest is getting to something particularly emotional, a man, an old colleague standing near the back, faints. He's completely out. Now, this guy was very tall and rather broad, so not only was it a miracle that he didn't take out the two tiny old ladies right in front of him, it was also really difficult to carry outside to get some air. Somebody has the brilliant idea that the pallbearers, those who carry the casket, should carry him, since they've practiced it and are reasonably strong. So everybody squeezes a bit tighter, nobody wants to leave the church, things just got interesting, to let them through. They pick him up, 3 on one side and 3 on the other, i.e. more or less as they would the casket, and start carrying him towards the door. Suddenly the guy wakes up, turns his head several times, grasps what's going on and who's carrying him faster than anybody can respond, and immediately starts yelling, "I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive." At which point one of the pallbearers laughs so hard that he drops what was thankfully a leg, and the others struggle to put him down in what is now a church absolutely exploding with laughter. The whole situation went on for a good 15 minutes, in which this guy walked outside and the priest tried to resume the service. But there absolutely continued to be giggles throughout. I, being a teenager at the time, also couldn't possibly hold it back every time I thought of this guy yelling he's alive. Nobody was even particularly upset because the uncle we were burying was always laughing and joking around, so it somehow felt appropriate that we had a great laugh at his funeral. At my cousin's funeral, one of my relatives literally tried jumping in the casket with him. Really traumatizing experience, I might add. At my grandma's funeral, there was a woman that had a really bad relationship with my grandma, but one of my aunts invited her to the funeral. She started receiving people as if she was a family member and tried to put herself at the center of everything. At a family friend's funeral, a man I allegedly met when I was 3 came up behind me, pulled my head back by placing his hand on my neck, and told me I might not remember him now, but I will someday. That creepy old dick fart. At an open casket wake, a friend of the deceased attempted to give her a drink of single malt whiskey. She ended up being forcibly removed as she wouldn't stop and spilled a lot of the alcohol in the casket. It was as horrible and inappropriate as it was heartbreaking for everyone. A relative of my husband died. There was a gathering at her house after the funeral, hosted by her husband. It was mostly family of my husband, but there were a few friends. There was catered food and drink, and people were just generally socializing and telling nice stories about the deceased. About 2 hours in, a man and woman in their mid-20s show up. They are acquaintances of the widower. They walk around the house a bit, grab a drink, and then disappear. I was asked to get some more drinks from the garage, which was off the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the garage. There was the young couple, leaning against the car and engaging in some pretty vigorous sexual relations. Another family member who was standing in the kitchen saw what I saw. I backed out of the garage because I was fairly embarrassed. I mean, who does that at a funeral? I guess the other relative told the widower because the next thing I know, there is shouting from the garage and the widower is telling these 2 people in no uncertain terms that they needed to leave. Apparently, not only they were having sex in the garage, but they were doing lines of coke off the hood of the car. Only a few people who were at the gathering found out what happened, thank goodness. I was at my then boyfriend's friend's funeral. Her aunt sat with me at the back and told me that she spontaneously lubricates at funerals. Scotched away real quick. Not super inappropriate, but my grandfather was always a trickster. He had a great sense of humor. He had this little song he would sing to me, my siblings, and my little cousins where he would just repeat the words poop poopy doo over and over. At his funeral, my aunt was telling stories about him, and in the middle of her telling a story, my 6-year-old cousin screamed poop poopy doo in front of 50 people. Needless to say, it lightened the mood a little bit and made everyone a little happier, remembering him in a good way. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My asshole father and his asshole sister start arguing over who will get their wedding ring. Not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off and their mother came out of consciousness, and the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring?" Fucking scumbags. The mother of the deceased putting on a terribly acted and math-fueled show about how much she loved and missed her daughter. Shortly thereafter, she was convicted of the daughter's murder. My brother-in-law's girlfriend locked herself in a car, cried, and screamed, threatening to kill herself. At my father-in-law's funeral. She was fine 5 minutes later and explained to my in-law she did it because she's not used to not having all the attention. She thought her being pregnant would make people forget that the father died?